Can you start off and talk about your plan for dealing with the deficit, why you think that's the approach that should be taken?
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Dottie and everyone at the partnership for hosting this today. I want to thank all of you for being here. One of the things I talk about most is partnerships and collaborating. So whether it's the city working with our other partners in the county, state, federal government, or private sector, whatever it might be, I think that's where we'll be most successful, is when we're working together, pulling in the same direction. So just want to thank you all for having me here this morning. But obviously, the budget, like you talked about, the 800-pound gorilla. I can tell you when I assumed the role of mayor back in October, very shortly after we discovered in the current fiscal year we had a $17 million hole that had to be closed up. So we immediately put in some vacancy control measures, soft hiring freeze unless it was a revenue generating position, things like that. We're able to close that gap for this year, and we're actually anticipating now a $1 million surplus ending this year. But then looking towards the upcoming fiscal year, that was the year. People talked for years about that's the year that the city of Buffalo kind of falls off the financial cliff. End of American Rescue Plan funds that have been used for a number of years. So we were facing a $73 million hole. And so we immediately got to work with our Department of Administration and Finance, working alongside other departments, commissioners, their teams, to start going through their budgets. I asked each department to go through and present a budget with a 10% reduction in their operations, knowing that not everyone could get there, between contractual costs, fixed costs. Some of them wouldn't be able to get there, but I wanted them to go through the exercise to see if we had a doomsday scenario where we would have to start looking at it. Through that process and presenting our budget, we were able to make $30 million in cuts throughout the budget to start to close that gap. In the plan, we have another way of generating around $9.5 million in revenue, we think, for next year, which left us with about a $30 million hole, and so we had to get creative. We presented to New York State 2 pieces of legislation that we think could close that gap, one being a hotel tax, 8% on rooms, which would average about $4 a room, $4 a night on a room, would lead to about a little over $3 million for the city. And then we talked about establishing the Buffalo Parking Mobility Authority, a situation where we would create a parking authority. The city sells 4 parking ramps that we own to the authority, and use that money over the course of the next 4 years in our 4-year financial plan at the soft landing while we rectify things structurally the rest of the way. I know there's a lot of talk about it's a one-shot infusion or it's a gimmick and they're just going to fill the hole for 1 year and be right back where you are the next year. But if you look closely at our 4-year plan, that is not how it's used. It's used over the course of our 4-year plan, along with a reduction and in addition to that, I should take a half step back. In the budget, proposed an 8% tax increase. No one likes to raise taxes, but the city's tax levy remained flat from 2007 to 2022. We did not increase the levy, and it's been extremely detrimental to our operation. And so we have to try and catch up there. We'll never fully catch up, obviously, with the compounding effect of things, and we'll never fully catch up, but we have to start making some of that ground up. 8% on a $150,000 assessed value home in the house is about $11 a month. We felt that was a responsible number. We could implement that. But again, if you look at the 4-year plan, we spend that money from the parking ramp down over 4 years. Start to do we have some other plans within our operation to increase additional revenues, but it's been 6 months and you can only get so much done in 6 months. Trying to make up for a budget that's been headed in this direction for a number of years. So a lot of those plans hopefully in place. We've had conversations basically daily with the governor's office, other representatives in Albany. We feel very optimistic, very positive about the fact that these pieces of legislation will be included in the budget and that we can use them to our benefit.
So, the budget's, it's not really complex, right? So anyone's here who's ever done a budget or worked on accounting, the first thing you need to do is have an honest assessment. How much is your actual debt? If you have your own business, you can't BS yourself and undercut your expenses. But in the public sector world, we sometimes, shade our expenses to make it look like we're not in a jam so we can kick it down the road. And I believe that's what we're doing now. This idea, we have a $40 million budget, a $50 million deficit, a $60 million, a $70, control board says 90. Like, we don't really have a good idea of how much debt we have. And that's a recipe for disaster. So the first thing you have to do is you kind of got to come clean to say, how bad of a jam are you really in? Because you can't devise a restructuring plan unless you know how much your debt is. I mean, it's kind of crazy. So I would have an open door, and the first thing I would do is I would ask the state comptroller to come in, really tell us how big our debt is. You know, are you really going to be able to double revenues from parking? Is gambling revenue really a realistic thing? Is, you know, putting on paper, we're going to cut overtime for uniform branches, even though those things are baked into contracts? Like, are these real expenditure savings or are they not? So I would definitely start with that. You got to know what your debt is, and right now we're still in this magical world of, well, on paper we can say that we're going to drive all our overtime expenses down, even though a perusal of the last 8 years of overtime has shown it's only gone up and not down. And there's always been these odd things the city puts in their budgets, whether it's we're going to get all this marijuana money that never comes, we're going to get Seneca money that never comes. There's always all these things. So, but we've done that for almost a decade, and each year something has happened. So either the ARPA money came in. So if the federal government hadn't delivered all that money to Buffalo 3 budgets ago, we would have been where we are today 3 years ago. So this sort of consistent can kick is the real problem. So once you figure out what your real debt is, then you got to figure out, can I pay it? You know, or do I have to restructure? So our plans aren't that different. You know, the acting mayor is saying, I'm going to take $50 million to finance this year's debt by the sale of an asset. I'm saying, where does that get you next year? Next year you're starting at 40, at 50? It's not fixing next year. So in order to come into structural balance, you have to do a restructuring of your debt. So we know at the minimum what our deficit will be for the next 4 years. So we need to come up with a plan, and that's my plan, is that you can do deficit bonding, and the control board can do that bonding, and it'll bond for the next 4 years of your debt. During that time, you have to work with the control board, with the state comptroller, to come up with an actual revenue plan and an expenditure plan. And at the end of 4 years, you better be in balance, because you can't do it again. But the parking ramp idea is also just, there's no dollars there. Like, I need $40 million to close my deficit, so I'm going to sell my parking ramps for $40 million. There's no valuation. Like, no independent person has looked at this. Bond council's not even involved yet, so we don't even know. So I know that I've been involved with bond deals before. They're going to want an outside appraiser to come in to say what we think these buildings are worth. They're going to bring in outside engineers to do structural analysis of all these buildings, and they're just going to do, you know, the 8th grade math, back of the envelope stuff. Here's what the revenues that come in, here's the expenditures, and that's how they'll determine whether someone will go to market for bonds on these things. But these are not a tomorrow transaction. This takes a long time. So even if, you know, the sort of plan goes forward to sell a revenue-generating asset, good luck getting that money, you know, immediately. So I think it's irresponsible to count that money in this year's budget, because, boy, you know, that's a real gamble. But if you lose that gamble, you're going to be out of cash in August. And that's not a place where the city wants to be. So you got to stop the can kicking. You have to acknowledge the debt. I worked with the county legislator after the red-green budget debacle. I came in and as part of the team to put the county back on track. We had 2 very painful but realistic budgets, and that's how we got over the red-green. But for those 2 years, we really set ourselves up to go back into structural balance. And the county has been in structural balance since then. And I came into state government after the 08 catastrophe financially, and the state was in very bad shape. But we had to work 2 very painful budgets where we did a lot of cuts. I mean, first we sort of cut the extras, and the next year we got closer to the bone, but in the third year, we were really cutting the bone out of state programming, but we had to do it. And at the same time, we put a millionaire's tax in place, that helped bring our revenue up as we were bringing our expenditures down, and we've been on track since then. So, structural balance should be our goal. Getting through, the primary should not be the goal.
$70 million today, every day that number seems to change. So the first thing I would do as mayor is do a third-party audit, an independent audit of the city's finances to find out exactly where we are. I think that too often we want to try to fix things without knowing how they're broken. We need to know why we're in this position, we need to know how we got here, and we need to do some correction. And the problem with what I'm seeing is that there's no corrective measures being taken. We didn't get here organically, it didn't happen by accident. There was some intentionality, there were some mistakes that were made. We need to identify what those were and do something to fix them. And so I think the audit would help lay the foundation for whatever policies we would put into place. And I think that also we always do these one-offs, these short-term fixes. And we have generational issues here in the city of Buffalo that we need to address. We need long-term, sustainable solutions that are not just a part of my administration, but that are sustainable beyond my administration and beyond this particular moment. So I think we have to focus on those kinds of things going forward, come up with some revenue generating ideas that I have not heard thus far. Again, these are one-time fixes, selling city assets or going into further debt. Both of these solutions mortgage our future indefinitely, and listen, honestly, maybe some combination of those two things have to happen. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I think we have to also be creative in how we look at this. And before we start talking about taking out more debt or selling city assets, let's fix what was wrong. And so I don't hear that. We have our largest cost centers, Buffalo Police, Buffalo Fire, overtime, all these other kinds of things. I hear no addressing of those things. Those things have helped us get in this situation, and we have to have somebody, I think, that is willing to speak truth to those organizations and to manage them effectively going forward.
So what kind of truth do you think needs to be said, and what directions do we need to go in?
Well, I mean, so often here in the city of Buffalo, there are, people get into these positions or whatever, whether it's the mayor or whether it's commissioners of these different departments, and with no historical knowledge, no context. They don't know why the contracts are written the way they are. They don't know what the unions are actually asking for, what they're after. I have 20 years of experience hiring everyone in the fire department from 1998 up through 2017, doing all of their pensions, all of their medical, all of those things, negotiating contracts with them. And so I think we need somebody with that kind of experience who understands what these cost centers are, understands how to negotiate with the unions and how to manage them effectively to keep these, because listen, we can't keep doing the same thing expecting a different result. We cannot keep doing the same thing.